right, you guys, it is time now to take the political pulse of America. And the beat today, the economy. During the Meet the Press interview this weekend, the president was asked about the economy and if the U.S. would be okay in the long term. Here's what he said.
You know, you say some people on Wall Street say, well, I tell you something else. Some people on Wall Street say that we're going to have the greatest economy in history. Why don't you talk about them? Because some people on Wall Street say this is the greatest thing.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at, though. It's the same question.
Yeah, there are many people on Wall Street say this is going to be the greatest windfall ever happened.
And that's my question.
Remember
the long term.
Yeah.
Is it okay in the short term to have a recession?
This. Look, everything's okay. What we are, I said, this is a transition period. I think we're going to do fantastically.
Yeah, no people in interviews, even in our interviews, ever answer yes or no questions with a yes or no. It's amazing that President Trump does that. For reaction, let's bring in Congressman, especially when it's a dangerous question like that one. Congressman Rich McCormick of Georgia, welcome to the show. I know you hear pushback from your constituency, just like I hear pushback from this audience, on the fact that President Trump says, look, short-term pain means long-term gain. Is your constituents, are they buying that? Are your constituents buying that?
Well, it depends on which constituents. This is still a very partisan era of American politics. If you look at the short term, if you're talking about the stock market always goes up and down, reacts to all kinds of things, whether it be PE ratios, earnings reports, energy prices, policy, regulation. It reacts to everything. But if you're talking about long-term consequences to an American economy, having less tariffs for both countries is always going to result in something better, a better economy. I think the long-term prospects of the United States are good as long as we get on top of our debt crisis. That is our biggest enemy right now. And that's one thing we have not tackled historically since about 2004 when this incremental change in spending occurred. And we got to get on top of that or it's going to hurt us.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up debt crisis because that brings us to the current budget. Obviously, you and your colleagues in the House are still putting together that budget and hashing it all out. Speaker Johnson says he'd like to have it passed, in the House at least, before the end of this month. Where do you stand on that? Specifically, where do you stand on spending cuts? Because it seems to me that that is going to be critical, whatever number you and your colleagues ultimately come at in terms of those spending cuts.
It will be, and we're not going to pass if it's not aggressive enough. I know we drew a line in the sand about $1.5 trillion of savings, but that's over 10 years. Quite frankly, that's not even good enough. If you think about $1.5 trillion in 10 years, that's about a half a year of deficit spending. I know people are always worried about what's going to affect their district or whoever is supporting them and how that's going to play out. But if we're not going to go at this aggressively, we're not going to fix this problem. It's going to affect our currency. It's going to affect our economy. It's going to affect everything we do. And we have not shown the stomach to do that so far. And I don't think you're going to have some of the conservative budget hawks like myself voting for a bill that is not serious about that budget.
So give me a number if you don't mind. Sorry, David, I just am curious. Would you give me a number that you think is an aggressive number? $1.5 trillion over 10 years you say isn't aggressive enough. What would you consider aggressive and palatable?
Well, I think that's probably what the compromise is going to be. I don't think it's good enough, but I'm not going to let good be the enemy of great. But if it doesn't have those things that we've been promised, that we voted for this last bill with, and I'm one of the 34 holdouts from the December CR, which I said, I'm not going to vote for that. It's a horrible bill, which 100% of the Democrats voted for. It has to be at least something that makes a little bit of sense to bend the curve of spending, which we have not done in a very long time.
So, Congressman, you want more cuts, obviously, even if it's $1.5 trillion. Here's the thing. You got the moderates, right? They sent that letter to Speaker Johnson on Medicaid, Medicare, and all that. They're like, what, 450 billion is okay, but they're not going higher than that. They think waste, fraud, and abuse, great, but if you're going to try to cap spending as it relates to Medicaid, they're not going to do that. So what's happening here? Because this is really dicey here, and the budget reconciliation deal has to get passed, or those tax cuts are not going to be extended.
Well, I think the president is going to weigh in on this. Make it very difficult for people to hold out on one side or the other. But people are going to draw their lines in the sand, whether it be SALT, whether it be spending. Medicaid is an interesting one because that's supposed to be run by the states. Now there's several states that have up to 90% of Medicaid paid for by the federal government. It used to be that only 1/3 of all budget spending from the government came from the federal government. Now it's 2/3. That's simply not going to work because these states, by and large, have balanced budgets. The federal government does not. We keep on spending ourselves into oblivion. That will affect everybody, not just one state, not just one constituency, but the entire nation if we don't get on top of this.
Let me just quickly follow up if I could. So what do you think is the bigger hurdle when it comes to dealing with the moderates on this, Medicaid spending or the SALT tax?
I think both. I think they're dug in pretty hard. But if you look at it, there's probably just as many people, if not more, on the conservative side that are also dug in. So this will be a fight. And I think the president's going to have to weigh in with both people. I've seen both visit the White House. I've been in a closed doors meeting with about 20 budget hawks like myself. And then, of course, add into that the military spending, which we increased, but it's still at all-time lows since World War II. And this is in a very precarious time where China is threatening Taiwan. We have an invasion of Ukraine and Israel is being threatened. And basically the entire world is rearming. So there's a lot of fights on the front simultaneously, and we're going to have to come to some sort of agreement or we'll end up with a Democratic ruled bill, and that's not good for anybody.
Congressman, New York Times has a headline, Biden aides decided against a cognitive test in early 2024. This is from a book that was written about this. White House aides have decided to not have Biden perform a cognitive test. It said they believe that Biden taking one would bring to light questions about his cognitive function. Well, yes. But does this mean that any of these people who said no to this cognitive test can be held accountable in any way, shape, or form for the fact that our country was in dire threat? We could have had anything happen during that time. And these people were more concerned about their own power than they were about knowing the truth about the cognitive function of the President of the United States.
Yeah, I'm an ER doc by trade. My last shift was just months, actually less than a month before I was sworn into office. And that was less than 3 years ago. But it doesn't take a doctor to see his cognitive decline. You could see it before he was even elected, not just in the way he walked, not in the way he talked, his facial expressions, his ability to answer questions, even his ability to interpret emotions was compromised even when he was running before he was elected. This came as no surprise to anyone, whether it be Democrat or Republican. We all saw it well before he was even elected. It was a night and day difference between the politician he was. Whether they wanted him to have that cognitive test or not was really inconsequential. We knew who was running and who wasn't running the country. We knew that he wasn't going to be the president in the next election. Even if he was elected, somebody else would have had to take it over. The American people were onto it. That's why he ended up with Harris. That was an absolute disaster for the Democratic Party. And what ultimately happened is what happens with a lot of people who stay here too long. Other people making decisions for him. Thank God it didn't result in something catastrophic.
Since we're talking about the past administration in the White House, let's shift our focus to the current administration. President Trump just yesterday came out with this idea that he would retool, renovate Alcatraz in order to house hardened criminals there. I'm sure at this point there's been some conversation between you and your colleagues in Congress about this idea. If not, I'm curious what your gut feeling is on this idea.
Well, I know it's sure hard to escape from. There's a swim that we do for the Navy SEALs Foundation, and it is a very difficult place to get away from. Maybe it's better than having people in Guantanamo in Cuba. Who knows? I think we can use it. The question is how economic it is. How secure it is obvious, but how useful it is and how much it costs to renovate, that's the question we're going to have to face, because once again, it's going to cost money to both revamp and to supply. But it's an interesting idea, and this is one of the things I really enjoy about President Trump. He thinks outside the box, and I love that about him.
Yeah, I think this is something he mentioned in campaign speeches too. Am I wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that's why I'm not that surprised about it. I think he said something about it before, but yes, definitely always thinking outside the box. Congressman, congratulations, Doctor. We appreciate you forfeiting a career that I'm sure had a lot of meaning as well to serve the American people. And thanks for being with us today.
Always a pleasure. You have a blessed day. Semper Fidelis.
Do the same. Thank you so much.
Take care, Congressman.